I'll start with our opening prayer, and then please mute yourselves so that we don't hear you talking and noise in the background. And I'll do the same as soon as I'm finished with this and turn it over to Ryan. I'll start with our opening prayer, and then I'll introduce Ryan a little. She definitely deserves an introduction. And so here we go. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Mavidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the divine being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the divine being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all joyous and suffering beings everywhere. So we're very privileged to have this morning as our guest speaker, Ryan NeuCollins. Ryan has been a devotee of the center for years and just retired from the board of trustees, having served as secretary of the board for several years, and is going to tell us about her pursuit of studies with Nisargadatta Maharaj, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. I count Ryan among the friends of this center. She has done so much in the way of service for the center. We're grateful to her for all that service and also for this talk this morning. So Ryan, as you may know, is an ordained interfaith minister, very busy in that ministry. And so she is broad in her interests, but very sharp-pointed in her spiritual practice. Again, it's a privilege to have Ryan among us and to offer us this talk this morning. Ryan, to you. Thank you, dear.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm assuming most of you have had time to read this slide. So when I go through the slide, as you probably read in the brief bio, as I go through this talk about Nisargadatta, I'll discuss him from the perspective of devotees, their anecdotes about them. I'll read you some of his own teachings, and I'll also delve into a brief biography of him. So, but before we get started, I'm going to give you a brief intro. So he was a guru of the Navna Sampradaya lineage, which translated into English means the 9 guru lineage. He probably was the most famous teacher of Jnana Yoga after Ramana Maharshi. He came after Ramana Maharshi, refusing all money and all attempts to build up an ashram around him for, gosh, over 40 years. He conducted question and answer sessions in an attic room in the slums of Bombay. And from these talks, these questions and answer sessions, books were written that compiled these talks, and they brought him fame throughout the rest of the world. So let's go on to our next slide.
Let's see.
It's not doing it. Mark, for some reason the slide is not moving. There we are. Okay. So in 1973, the publication of this book, I Am That, which is a compilation by Morris Friedman of Nisargadatta's talks. This is the book that brought fame to him, and it's considered very eloquent and profound, despite the fact that Nisargadatta never went beyond second grade. I am now going to switch to one of his own teachings. I'll let you read this first. Okay, so we're going to go to his own teaching. It's from chapter 7. And this kind of gives an introduction to him in his own words. So I think it's a little more appropriate than me giving it to you. So here's a question and answer session. The questioner asks, kindly tell us how you realized. I met my guru when I was 34 and realized by 37. What happened during realization? Pleasure and pain lost their sway over me. I was free from desire and fear. I found myself full, needing nothing. I saw that in the ocean of pure awareness, on the surface of the universal consciousness, the numberless waves of the phenomenal worlds arise and subside without beginning and end. As consciousness, they are all me. As events, they are all mine. There is a mysterious power that looks after them. That power is awareness, self with a capital S, life, God, whatever name you give it. It is the foundation, the ultimate support of all that is, just like gold is the basis for all gold jewelry. Subtract the name and shape from the jewelry and the gold becomes obvious. Be free of name and form and of the desires and fears they create, then what remains? Questioner, nothingness? Yes, the void remains, but the void is full to the brim. It is the eternal potential, just as consciousness is the eternal actual. Is there such a thing as immortality? Only the process of change continues. Nothing lasts. How about awareness? Does it last? Awareness is not of time. Time exists in consciousness only. Beyond consciousness, where are time and space? Within the field of your consciousness, there's your body, of course. But the idea of my body is different from the other bodies is not there. To me, it's a body, not the body. A mind, not my mind. The mind looks after the body all right. I need not interfere. What needs to be done is being done in the normal and natural ways. Questioner, don't you have desires and fears anymore? When I realized my true being, I left behind my human nature to look after itself until its destiny is exhausted. Occasionally, an old reaction, emotional or mental, happens in the mind, but it is at once noticed and discarded. After all, as long as one's burdened with a person, one is exposed to its idiosyncrasies and habits. Are you not afraid of death? I'm dead already. In what sense? I'm double dead. Not only am I dead to my body, but to my mind as well. A tremendously complex work is going on all the time in your brain and body. Are you conscious of it? Why not admit that one's entire life may sink largely below the threshold of consciousness and yet proceed sanely and smoothly? Is that normal? What's normal? Is your life obsessed by desires and fears, full of strife and struggle, normal? To be acutely conscious of your body, is it normal? To be torn by feelings, tortured by thoughts, is it normal? A healthy body and a healthy mind live largely unperceived by their owner. Only occasionally, through pain or suffering, they call for attention and insight. Why not extend the same to the entire personal life? One can function rightly responding well and fully to whatever happens without having to bring it into the focus of attention or awareness. When self-control becomes second nature, awareness shifts its focus to deeper levels of existence and action. Questioner, don't you become a robot? You seem to be in favor of a computerized life. Personality is merely a reflection of the real. Why should not the reflection be true to the original as a matter of course, automatically? Need the person have any designs of its own? The life of which it is an expression will guide it. Once you realize that the person is merely a shadow of the reality, but not reality itself, you cease to fret and worry. You agree to be guided from within, and life becomes a journey into the unknown. Okay, so that's part of chapter 12, just to give you an idea, both of his life, what happened when he realized, and the changes it brought about. So now, though, I'm going to go into a biological sketch of his life. So let's move to the next slide. This is a slightly younger picture of him, probably in his 30s. I included it only because it kind of shows a hint of the peculiar intensity of his gaze that developed as he got older until it was really a key characteristic of him, and it was noted. But anyhow, he was born in 1897 in Bombay. His parents were bhaktis. They were farmers in a small village outside of town. He was one of 6 siblings, or he had 6 siblings. He was one of 7. He tended cattle, worked in the fields with his dad. He was a real son of the soil. His education, as mentioned, never extended beyond the 2nd grade. After his father died, he and his elder brother moved into Bombay to make a living to support the family. And so he opened up a small goods store, mainly selling beedies, leaf-rolled cigarettes. And then he opened 7 more shops. He eventually had 40 employees, was quite successful, married, had 4 children of his own. It really wasn't until 1933 that he finally met his guru. Here's his guru. In minutes of initiation, though, he experienced an extreme display of colors, fell into a deep trance, samadhi. After waking him, his guru said, "You're not what you take yourself to be. Go back to that state of pure being where the sense of I am is still in its purity, before it got contaminated with I am this or I am that. Your burden is of false self-identifications. Abandon them all. Trust me, I tell you, you are divine. Take it as the absolute truth. Your joy is divine. Your suffering is divine too. You are God." In Nisargadatta's words, I believed him and soon realized how accurate were his words. I did not condition my mind by thinking I am God, I am wonderful, I am beyond. I simply followed his instructions, which was to focus the mind on pure being, on I am, and stay in it. I used to sit for hours together with nothing but the I am in my mind. So 2.5 years later, his guru died. And so thereupon, Nisargadatta abandoned Bombay, and he began a course of penniless wandering that lasted the better part of a year. He didn't talk about his past very often, but he did mention this period to several different people. So it's chronicled, and several of the sources are pretty credible. So I'm bringing up a few things here. He mentioned there were a lot of maybe police would gather vagrants or people and put them into jail. And for some reason, he seemed to be ignored all the time. He just came through all of these things as if no one saw him. At one point, he found himself wandering with fields all around him. He was extremely hungry, really hungry. Nothing was around him. He didn't know how he was going to continue. At that point, he turned around and saw a small hut with smoke coming from it that somehow he had not seen. So he walked over to it. A man came out, was filled with veneration, offered him lots of food. And when he left that hut, he was kind of marveling in his mind about how this happened. And he hadn't gone 50 steps when he turned around to look at it again, and it was no longer there. So, you know, he was being taken care of. At any rate, he terminated this course of wandering because his tradition was one in which true renunciation is believed to be inward, having little to do with externals. So it was during this return that he attained final self-realization or continual identification with and as the divine. In his own words, joy and deep, all-embracing love became my normal state, and it all disappeared. Myself, my guru, the life I lived, the world around me, only peace remained, an unfathomable silence. Once he returned home, he discovered that his family had somehow managed to run his business into the ground with just one shop remaining. So not being in a state where this had a whole lot of impact, he simply maintained the one shop for his family's needs, and then he reduced all of his own bodily needs to a minimum. During the next 5 years or so, he followed a strict, regulated daily regime in which he spoke but a few words. He often lost himself in divine light, fell into ecstasy for long periods, experienced sacred visitations, and while singing devotional songs that described food offerings to God, would taste the food itself, etc. Standard saintly experiences. So anyhow, this is him. He's praying, he's not crying. Looks ambiguous, perhaps. Okay, anyhow, eventually his neglect for his own bodily needs was so extreme that his immune system suffered. He contracted tuberculosis, for which he refused any treatment. Instead, he did 500 prostrations daily in front of his teacher's photo, and he recovered. 2 years later, he got cancer. He did take some minimal medicine at that point due to his family concern, but nothing appropriate to cancer. But still, it receded, and for the next 30 or so years, he was in fine health. Okay, in the beginning, he didn't have a room where people came to discuss spirituality with him. Instead, he talked to the people who tried to purchase or who used to purchase bidis from his shop, where he was known to give away products and hand back money without counting it. So he was pretty popular. And so he talked to them just like all shopkeepers talk to people who come up. But his peculiarity was that he would only talk about consciousness. No trivial talk, okay, only spiritual issues. And here are some of the talks. Here's one. Is pain a cosmic fact or purely mental? Asks one questioner. And he says, the universe is complete, and where there's completeness, where nothing lacks, what can give pain? Questioner. The universe may be complete as a whole, but incomplete in details. Maharaj. As part of the whole, seen in relation to the whole is also complete. It is also complete. Only when seen in isolation does it become deficient and thus a seed of pain. What makes for isolation? Huh? Questioner. Limitations of the mind, of course. The mind cannot see the whole for the heart. Maharaj. Good enough. The mind, by its very nature, divides and opposes. Can there be some other mind which unites and harmonizes, which sees the whole in the part, and the part is totally related to the whole? Questioner. This other mind, where does one look for it? In going beyond the limiting, dividing, and opposing mind, in ending the mental process as we know it. When this comes to an end, that mind is born. Questioner. In that mind, the problems of joy and sorrow exist no longer. Maharaj. Not as we know them, as desirable or repugnant. It becomes rather a question of love seeking expression and meeting with obstacles. The inclusive mind is love in action, battling against circumstances, initially frustrated, ultimately victorious. Questioner. Between the spirit and the body, is it love that provides the bridge? Maharaj. What else? Mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses it. Okay, and another small conversation from this period. The questioner asks, ultimately, what am I? Maharaj. The ultimate denial of all that you are not. Questioner. I do not understand. Maharaj. It is your fixed idea that you must be something or other that blinds you. Questioner. How do I get rid of this idea? Maharaj. If you trust me, believe when I tell you that you are the pure awareness that illuminates consciousness and its infinite content. Realize this and live accordingly. If you do not believe me, then go within, inquiring, what am I? Or focus your mind on I am, that concept, which is pure and simple being. Questioner, must I renounce everything first and live a homeless life? Maharaj, you cannot renounce. You may leave your home and thereby give trouble to your family, but attachments are in the mind and will not leave you until you know your mind inside and out. First things first, know yourself, all else will come with it. Questioner, but you already told me that I'm the supreme reality. Is this not self-knowledge? Maharaj, of course you're the supreme reality, but what of it? Every grain of sand is God. To know it is important, but that is only the beginning. Discover all you are not. Body, feelings, thoughts, ideas, time, space, being and not being, this or that. Nothing concrete or abstract that you can point to is you. A mere verbal statement will not do. You may repeat a formula endlessly without any result whatsoever. You must watch yourself continuously, particularly your mind, moment by moment, missing nothing. This witnessing is essential for the separation of the self from the not self. So these were not your standard street vendor conversations, but through them he became recognized and eventually famous among certain circles. Eventually he moved into his son's apartment, which had a small attic apartment, 12 by 12 room, in which he received about 20 visitors daily. And on weekends and holidays, somehow 30, they squeezed in there. I guess a lot of times people were on the stairs leading down and into the streets. But anyhow, it was a popular place. This slide in the picture shows where he lived, actually. All right, it was not the best area of town. Okay, now here's a brief description of going to one of his question and answers from a psychologist named Dr. Shanzer. And he says, I planned a trip to India for December 1978. I arranged to visit various centers, ashrams, hospitals, and of course, gurus. I did not know that Nisargadatta even existed, yet within 2 days of my arrival in Bombay, one of the head monks in Swami Muktananda's ashram said, since my guru isn't here right now, you really should meet a fully enlightened master. Here's his address. So the psychologist went there via taxi. The taxi couldn't find it. It was wandering all over because there was no bombast or he, as I said, Nisargadatta didn't want a lot of attention. So when he finally got there, this is how he describes it. Let's see, next slide. There were about 10 people already sitting with a wiry little old man who was in dialogue with Mullar Patan, a translator. Maharaj, the little old man, inspected each of us as we ascended. As I sat down, I felt a tremendous pressure of feeling around my heart. I felt like crying. There was so much fun and mirth in his manner of expression and the response of the group. I was captivated by the energy around him. At the end of one visit, Maharaj asked, "How many of you have understood what I've been saying?" A few of us raised our hands. To those, he said, "Well, then you need not come back." Then he announced, "And those of you who have not understood, you also should not come back." Finally, he asked the question, "And who will be here tomorrow?" Everyone raised their hands. There was something about the place from which he spoke that was so impressive intellectually and so attractive because of its lucid, frank, and spontaneous manner. Maharaj was the most unpretentious guru I have ever met. Yet within this appearance of everyday normalcy was a guru who was answering my questions about practice and conditioning with uncanny precision. So this is one person's perception of Maharaj. Other people talked about him being total love. Most often, though, he was noted for being no nonsense and cantankerous. Here's a recollection of him by David Godman, who knew him as well as, if not better than most people. Godman. I did hear him say a couple of times that he respected the fact that we had all abandoned our lives in the West in order to come to India in search of liberation. But that didn't mean that in practice, he treated us respectfully. We all got shouted at on various occasions, and we all got told off from time to time because of things we said or did. We were all a little fearful of him because we never knew when the next eruption would occur. On the other hand, we had all come to have the dirt beaten out of us in the same way that the dhobies clean clothes by smashing them on rocks. Maharaj smashed our egos, our minds, and our concepts on the immovable rock of the self, that's capital S, because he knew that in most cases, that was the only way to help us. I never got the feeling that he was making a conscious effort to teach in silence in the way that Ramana Maharshi did by looking at people and transmitting some form of grace. However, he was aware of the mental states of all the people who were sitting there, and he not infrequently complained about them. I have an embarrassing memory of a time when he got angry with me in particular. One afternoon, my attention was wandering, and my mind was embroiled in some larger-than-life ego fantasy. I was off in my own little world, not really listening to what was going on. Maharaj stopped the answer that he was giving to someone else, apparently in mid-sentence, turned 180 degrees around, and started shouting at me because I hadn't even been attempting to understand. I definitely deserved that one. In retrospect, I can say that it increased both my attentiveness and my faith in him. When you know that the teacher in front of you is continuously monitoring all your thoughts and feelings, it makes you clean up your mental act quite a bit. But back to his teaching style. One afternoon, two of us waded through floodwaters to Maharaj's door. We were both staying in a cheap lodge about 200 yards away, so it wasn't that much of a trek. We scrubbed off the filth with water from a tap on the ground floor and made our way up to Maharaj's room. He seemed very surprised to see us. I think he thought that the floods would keep everyone away. He said in Marathi that there would be no session that afternoon because none of the translators would be able to make it. I assume he wanted us to leave and go home, but we both pretended that we didn't understand what he was trying to tell us. After one or two more unsuccessful attempts to persuade us to go, he gave up, sat in the corner of the room reading a newspaper. I didn't care. I was just happy to be sitting in the same room with him. I sat there in absolute silence for over an hour, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences I have ever had. I felt such an intense, rock-solid silence descend on me that became deeper and deeper as the minutes passed. There was just a glow of awareness that filled me so completely, thoughts were utterly impossible. You don't realize what a monstrous imposition the mind is until you have lived without it, completely happily, completely silently, and completely effortlessly for a short period of time. So this anecdote was delivered during an interview. And at this point, the interviewer asked about what the question and answer sessions were like. And again, this is Godman who responds, and he says, well, whenever people first came to see him, oh, let me go to the next slide. Wait a minute. Okay, whenever people first came to see him, he would encourage them to talk about their background. He'd try to find out what spiritual path they were on and what had brought them to him. In the face of Maharaj's probing questions, visitors would end up having to justify their worldview and their spiritual practices. So this would be one level of the interaction, but at a deeper and more subtle level, Maharaj would be radiating an energy, a Shakti, that quieted your mind and made you aware of what lay underneath the mind and all of its ideas and concepts. Now imagine these two processes going on simultaneously. With his mind, the questioner has just constructed and articulated a version of his worldview. Underneath, though, he'll be feeling the pull of his beingness, the knowledge of what is truly real. Maharaj's energy will be enhancing awareness of that stratum throughout the conversation. There was a certain indecisive look that appeared on people's faces at this point when they became aware of these two competing realities. I should also mention here the limitations that he put on the types of questions he'd be willing to answer. He'd say, I'm not interested in what you have heard or read. I'm not interested in secondhand information that you've acquired from somewhere else. I am only interested in your own experience of yourself. If you have any questions about that, you can ask me. Later, after you've had your initial dialogues with him, he'd introduce an even more stringent stipulation. I'm not interested in answering questions that assume the existence of an individual person who inhabits a body. I don't accept the existence of such an entity, so for me, such questions are entirely hypothetical. Now, this second constraint was a real conversation killer. You couldn't say, how do I get enlightened? Or what do I do? Because all such questions presuppose the existence of an I, an assumption that Maharaj always used to reject. So when the second restriction effectively cut off most of the questions that people like to ask gurus, Maharaj would fill the vacuum by talking about the nature of consciousness. Let me tell you about one conversation I had with him. Although first I should mention that I sometimes used to argue with Maharaj simply because I knew that he liked people to argue with him. He seemed to like the cut and thrust of debate. I can't remember exactly what we talked about, but I do remember that I was ostensibly pointing out what I claimed were contradictions in his teachings. It was all very good-humored, but after about 5 minutes, he said, next slide, you don't really understand the purpose of my dialogues here. I don't say things simply to convince people that they are true. I'm not speaking about these matters so people can build up a philosophy that can be rationally defended and which is free of all contradictions. When I speak my words, I'm not speaking to your mind at all. I'm directing my words at consciousness. I am planting my words in your consciousness. Once my words have been planted in your consciousness, they will sprout, they will grow, and at the appropriate moment, they will bear fruit. It's nothing to do with you. All this will happen by itself. However, if you think about the words too much or dispute their meaning, you'll postpone the moment of their fruition. All this was said in a very genial tone. However, at this point, he got very, very serious, glowering at me. He said very sternly, enough talking. Be quiet and let the words do their work. end the conversation. Okay, so pulling away from that interview, I'm just showing you a slide of some of his Western devotees and his Indian ones. As I said, the place was completely full, and it was a tiny room inside. And despite all attempts to get him to move, he would not do that. People offered him money, really nice places to live. Actually, in this apartment, he used to have to bathe in the kitchen and go across the street to use the public bathrooms. So anyhow, you can imagine that with such a large number of people constantly showing up at his flat, inevitably people of questionable character wandered in as well. The following interview with another one of his devotees describes one such instance. The interviewer had just asked whether Nisargadatta looked after the welfare of his devotees in the same way that other great gurus did. I think I'm gonna switch slides. Oh, okay, no, I won't switch slides. Let me go back to the previous one. Okay, so whether he looked after his devotees. And the devotee says, I would answer a conditional yes to that question. Yes, because it's the nature of enlightened beings to be like this. They don't have a choice in the matter because these things just go on around them automatically. However, on a more superficial level, the answer might be no. If people took their personal problems to him, he might get angry. I saw several people go to him to tell them that they had all their money or their passports stolen, and his standard response was to tell them off for being careless. Despite his generally irritable response when people went to him for personal help, though, I think he was fully aware that he was looking after all of his devotees' well-being, even though it might not have looked that way a lot of the time. For instance, once when I had my money stolen while I was traveling to visit him, I expected to be told off, but he was surprisingly sympathetic. Later, when I was able to borrow some money from Jean Dunn, a woman who wrote some books about Nisargadatta, and returned to my lodgings in a distant city, I found the exact amount of money that had been stolen lying in an envelope on my bed. No one except Maharaj and Jean Dunn had known about the robbery. Harriet, the interviewer, asked, can you give me an example of him expressly stating that he would help his devotees? And the guy responds, well, I remember a large man from Madras who came to see Maharaj with what he said was a problem. I've been doing japa for many years and have acquired siddhis, which is powers, as a result. If I'm very pleased with someone, very good things happen to him or her automatically. I don't think about it or do anything, it just happens by itself. But if I get angry with someone, the opposite happens. Very bad things happen, and sometimes the person even dies. How can I stop these things from happening? Maharaj told him, all these siddhis have come on account of your japa. If you stop doing the japa, the siddhis will also stop. The man says he can't do that. It's taken him over completely, and Maharaj apparently doesn't buy it and repeats his advice. But instead of listening to him, the man looked very pleased with himself, and I got the feeling that he had just come there to show off his accomplishments. My opinion was confirmed when he announced that he was now willing to answer questions from anyone in the room. He hadn't come there to receive advice, he had come to give it out. Maharaj asked him to leave and said that if he really was interested in his teachings, he could go in the evening to the house of one of his women devotees, a Sanskrit professor, and she would explain them to him. He also told the man not to come back. I suspect the Maharaj wanted to keep him away from us because there was something strange and threatening about him. I'm not a very psychic kind of person, but I could definitely feel an unpleasant energy coming off this man. It was something that made me feel physically queasy. He really did have an aura of bad energy around him, and other people felt it as well. Anyhow, all this took place in the morning session. That evening, the Sanskrit professor showed up an hour late, looking very flustered. Maharaj immediately wanted to know what was going on. And she said, this man from Madras came to my house and I couldn't get him to leave. I told him that it was time for me to come here, but he wouldn't get up and go. I didn't really want to force him to go. He might have gotten angry with me and then I might have died. Maharaj puffed out his chest like a fighting cock going into battle and announced, no one can harm my devotees. You are under my protection. This man cannot do you any harm. If he comes to talk to you again, throw him out when it's time for you to come here. Nothing will happen to you. And Maharaj himself had no fear of people like this. Before he had the apartment attic, a yogi came to his beedi shop to test his powers. This yogi apparently had many siddhis, and he came to see if Maharaj, of whom he had heard great things, could match him. Maharaj just went about his business in the shop and refused all challenges to show off what he could do. Eventually, in an attempt to provoke him into doing something, the yogi said that he'd curse him and make something very bad happen to him. Maharaj looked at him with complete unconcern and said, you may be able to pull down 1,000 suns from the sky, but you can't harm me and you don't impress me. Now go away. I should explain that this was in the beginning before Maharaj had a room where people could gather. At the time I'm describing, they gathered instead in front of the shop. And though they sometimes wanted mundane matters cleared up by him, these were taboo. He was against talking about anything except consciousness. He called all topics such as karma, reincarnation, and so forth as kindergarten topics. He was also against the use of spiritual powers for enhancing one's life, even when this extended to himself. At this point, the interviewer asks if this was just a devotee's opinion or if he could give an example. And he said, in those days, there was in Bombay a famous Avalya, I guess it means Sufi, I might be pronouncing it wrong, by the name of Tiku Baba. One of his devotees often used to visit Maharaj and tell him many things about Tiku Baba's greatness. And on Tiku Baba's behalf, would invite Sri Maharaj to visit him. Before dropping his body, Tiku Baba sent him a message. I'm dropping my mortal body. Do come and receive my spiritual powers. But without the slightest hesitation, Sri Maharaj conveyed his message to him, which was, my contract has already been finalized once and for all. All right, so at this point, I'm going to take just a brief break from the anecdotes, just to tell you about two people who figure prominently in this talk and in Maharaj's life. David Godman, it should be Godman, it says Goodman there, wrote about 15 books on Ramana Maharshi. He lived in his ashram. I think he took care of his library, but he would visit Nisargadatta often. Morris Friedman is a guy who compiled all of his talks into that one book that became quite famous. He's a very interesting person. He was actually close to a lot of significant people. Not only very close to Nisargadatta, who was at his deathbed, at Morris's deathbed, but also Ramana Maharshi, Gandhi, Krishnamurti, Nehru, and I think Anandamayima, but I'm not positive about that one. But at one point or the other, he was a member of their ashrams. He was considered fully realized by both Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta. In fact, when he was in Gandhi's ashram, he designed Gandhi's spinning wheel, and he persuaded the Raja of Aundh, I might be pronouncing that wrong, A-U-N-D-H, to hand over all of his authority to the people that he had formerly ruled completely. And he was also the person who for months pestered Prime Minister Nehru to allow the Dalai Lama and other exiled Tibetans to stay in India. None of these activities were ever publicly acknowledged because Friedman disliked publicity of any kind, and he always tried to do his work anonymously. But he was a very interesting character. Anyhow, let me go on. Okay. Concerning the previous topic of helping one's devotees. Godman has the following account. At some point in the late 1970s, I was asked to take a South American woman called Anna Marie to Bombay. This is Bombay in the early days. And look after her because she hardly spoke a word of English. She spoke Spanish. Since I was planning to go to Bombay anyway to see Maharaj, I agreed to take her and look after her. A few hours into our train journey from Madras to Bombay, Anna Marie went to the bathroom. On Indian trains, at least at that time, that means a squat toilet, which is just a hole in the floor with footrests on either side of it. Anna Marie was sitting there doing her business when the train jolted on the tracks. Her glasses fell off, disappeared down the hole in the floor. It turned out to be her only pair, and without them, she was more or less blind. So early the next morning, as soon as they arrived into Bombay, they set off for an optician. This fellow tested her, but said there is something seriously wrong with her eyes. I don't know what it is. He closed down shop. He himself took them across Bombay by foot, about a mile, to a hospital where an eye surgeon he knew had an office. The eye surgeon, again, was flummoxed by Anna Marie's prescription, couldn't figure it out. So I took her to another area of the hospital with bigger, fancier machines. They finally got it figured out. And Anna Marie was able, in pidgin English and sign language, to convey the fact that she had fallen out of a building in South America on her face and had damaged her eyes, surgery had been done, and they were just, the curvature was very erratic and strange. So the surgeon shut down his office, took them on foot, cross town to the biggest optician in town. I'm thinking that would be the only place that could possibly have a prescription for her. The manager's big beaming smile lasted as long as it took him to read the prescription. He put it down on the counter and started to talk to us very apologetically. Normally, he said, we keep lenses for every possible prescription here in the store. We have a huge turnover, so we can afford to make and keep lenses that we have no customers for. Sooner or later, someone will drop by and buy them. But this prescription is such a ridiculous combination, no one would ever think of making it or keeping it. Until I saw it myself, I'd have guessed that nobody in the world had eyes that corresponded with these numbers. I'm sorry, I can't help you. And while he's talking, his apology lasted like 5 minutes. While he's talking, a store clerk who doesn't understand English comes up, grabs a prescription paper, goes back into the storage room, and comes wandering out with 2 lenses that exactly corresponded to the numbers on the prescription. The manager was absolutely flabbergasted and kept on repeating, this is not possible, just not possible. But anyhow, Godman says, it's my belief when you go to the guru, the power of that guru takes care of any physical problems that may arise. He doesn't do it knowingly. There's just an aura around him that takes care of these problems. But that's not the end of the story. Anna Marie was sitting with Maharaj every day for a week following this, but she couldn't understand what he was saying. He couldn't understand her. And one morning she appeared red-eyed. She'd been crying and praying all night for a Spanish translator because there's something very important I have to tell Maharaj, she said. I need a translator. That morning, as we were all sitting at a cafe on Grant Road, we noticed a new foreign face at an adjoining table reading a copy of I Am That. We introduced ourselves and discovered that, surprise, surprise, she was a professional Spanish-English translator. Anna Maria, of course, was over the moon. The translator she'd prayed for all night long had shown up 15 minutes before the question and answer session began. And this is what she had to say via the translator. Let's see. I was living in Venezuela when I had a dream of a mountain and 2 men. I found out soon afterwards that one of the men was Ramakrishna, but for a long time I didn't know who the other man was or what the mountain was.
Ramana Maharshi.
Then last year I saw a photo of Ramana Maharshi and realized that this was the second man in the dream. When I did some research to find out more about him, I soon realized that the mountain in the dream was Arunachala, In the dream, Ramana Maharshi looked at me in a very special way and transmitted a knowledge of his teachings to me. He didn't do it verbally, he just looked at me. And as he was looking, I just felt that he was filling me up with an understanding of his teachings, a knowledge that I could articulate quite clearly, even though no words passed between us. And I knew that I had to come to India. Something compelled me to do so. And while I was in Tiruvannamalai, sorry, but anyhow, I think it's near Ramana Maharshi's ashram, I heard about you, Nisargadatta, and again, I knew I had to come. Maharaj interceded at this point. What were the teachings that were transmitted to you in the dream? What did Ramana Maharshi tell you as he was revealing his teachings in silence? Anna Marie talked in Spanish for about 5 minutes, and then her translator began to explain, and we all sat there absolutely dumbfounded. She gave a perfect and fluent 5-minute summary of Maharaj's teachings. They were quite clearly not Ramana's teachings, but Maharaj's, Nisargadatta's. And this woman was giving a wonderful presentation of them. I think it was one of the best 5-minute summaries of the teachings I had ever heard. And remember, this was from a woman who was on her first visit, who had no acquaintance with Maharaj's teachings before coming there that week. At that point, Maharaj stood up, took Anna Marie downstairs and initiated her into the mantra of his lineage by writing it on her tongue with his finger. Okay, so I'm going to take a break from the anecdotes and read you another excerpt from his chapters. This one is from chapter 4. But before I do that, you can read this quote. Okay, so here's chapter 4. Maharaj is the one who's talking. They have been talking about the law of causation. Like everything mental, the so-called law of causation contradicts itself. No thing in existence has a particular cause. The entire universe contributes to the existence of even the smallest thing. Nothing could be as it is without the universe being as it is. When the source and ground of everything is the only cause of everything, to speak of causality as a universal law is wrong. The universe is not bound by its content because its potentialities are infinite. Besides, it's a manifestation or expression of a principle fundamentally and totally free, the questioner says. Yet in actual life, we invariably initiate action with a view to a result. Maharaj, yes, there is a lot of such activity going on because of ignorance. Would people know that nothing can happen unless the entire universe makes it happen, they would achieve much more with less expenditure of energy. Questioner, still, I cannot see how anything can come to be without a cause. Maharaj, when I say a thing is without a cause, I mean it can be without a particular cause. Your own mother was not needed to give you birth. You could have been born from some other woman, but you could not have been born without the sun and the earth. Even these could not have caused your birth without the most important factor, your own desire to be born. It is desire that gives birth, that gives name and form. The desirable is imagined and wanted and manifests itself as something tangible or conceivable. Thus is created the world in which we live, our personal world. The real world is beyond the mind's understanding. We see it through the net of our desires, divided into pleasure and pain, right and wrong, inner and outer. To see the universe as it is, you must step beyond the net. It's not hard to do so, for the net is full of holes. Questioner, what do you mean by holes, and how does one find them? Maharaj, look at the net and its many contradictions. You do and undo at every step. You want peace, love, and happiness. and work hard to create pain, hatred, and war. You want longevity, and you overeat. You want friendship, and you exploit. See your net is made of such contradictions and remove them. All right, next slide. And now, finally, I'm going to wrap up with a final reminiscence from David Godman about the end of Nisargadatta's life. The interviewer asked, did you carry on going to see him until he passed away? Were you there in the final days? David says, no, and I didn't want to be. I didn't want to sit there watching him slowly die. I wanted to keep my memory of a man who was a perpetual dynamo, an amazingly vital center of force and energy. I knew that he didn't regard himself as a body, but I didn't want to be there watching the cancer slowly reduce him to an invalid. I can't remember the date of my last visit, but I do remember that he was still talking without much trouble. He had cancer of the throat. Over the next few months, I kept receiving reports about Nisargadatta's failing health, but I never, was even tempted to go back. That is, until he suddenly appeared in one of my dreams, telling me to come and see him. It was such a forceful dream, it woke me up. I lay there in my bed, wondering if it really was him telling me to come, or whether it was just my subconscious manifesting a desire to go and see him one more time. I fell asleep without resolving the issue one way or the other. A few minutes later, he reappeared in my next dream, glaring at me. I just told you to come. Why didn't you believe me? David Godman never did go, but then he says in the interview, I started to have vivid and regular dreams in which I was visiting him in his room. I would go up the steps and find him there sitting in his usual seat and giving out teachings in his usual way. My dream logic would try to work out why he was still there, still teaching. In the dream, one part of me knew that he had died, but another part was witnessing him still alive, still teaching in his usual corner. In these dreams, I would sometimes come to the conclusion that he hadn't really died at all, that he had faked his death, waited until all the crowds had left, and then gone back to teaching with a small group of people who were somehow in on the game. My dream brain invented all kinds of stories such as these, but even in the dreams, they never really convinced me. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. These dreams went on all through the 1980s and well into the 1990s. The last dream in this sequence was different. I found Maharaj teaching a small group of people inside the main room of the ashram at Ramana Maharshi's place. This was unusual because I had never before dreamed of him anywhere outside of his room. Also, the people were different. They were not the Indian faces who populated his dreams and his room in the earlier dreams. They were all foreigners, all people I knew well. This time there was no doubt, no confusion about why or whether he was still alive. I looked at Maharaj, turned to my friends who were sitting on the floor with him and said with a great feeling of exultation, see, I told you he's alive. He didn't die at all, he's alive. And then the dream ended and I've never dreamt of him again. I realize now that he didn't die because he was never born. He is alive as a self, capital S, within me. He can't die. He's inside, biding his time, waiting for the words he planted there to destroy me and my little circumscribed world. I know that he hasn't given up on me, and I also know that one day he will prevail. Okay, so I do have a slide here in which I have the main teaching that he has ever given. All compiled and condensed into four little nuggets. They all said the same thing, but different ways. I'll let you read them. Okay, so yeah, so I actually, it looks like I have the wrong slide show up here. I did have one other slide that I wanted to show, but oh well. Okay, so that's that, everyone. Does anyone have any questions?
Hey, Ryan,
Yeah,
Jim Garvine here.
yeah.
I'd like to get a copy of that, how to do it. I'm a slow reader, but if you could forward that to me, that'd be great. And
Okay.
also, I have the book that you referred to, I Am That. I have that book. Is there any other books that you could recommend where you've got your info on him?
I would say I have not read these books actually, but the last 3 books by Gene Dunn are supposed to be really good. They cover the last years of his life. His teaching at that point becomes quite distilled, apparently. But to be honest, I Am That has so much information in it. It could take several years to read through that. It's taken me forever. I read it and I write notes all over my books, and then I go back and I write my favorite notes out on a notebook. Then I go back and I distill what I wrote into another area where I just have the most significant ones, and it's taken me forever. But it's just with very interesting teachings.
Yeah. I'll have to reread that book. It's been years since I read it, and it was, you have a different perspective and a mindset when you go back to these books.
Right.
I'll have to look at it again. I really appreciated your teaching. I really thought it was great. I like that.
Good. It was hard to figure out what to present, but anyhow.
Well, you did a beautiful job, Ryan, truly a beautiful job. Will you share with us that PowerPoint presentation so that we can put it up with your talk?
Yeah, I will. I'll try and send you the right one. And I'll be happy to do that. Yes. Okay.
So then Jim will be able to he'll be able to go to the end of it and find those 4 points.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how long it takes people to read. I'm very familiar with them.
I'm just a slow reader.
So they can
What?
start your video so they can see you there.
Ryan, this is Keith. I wanted to thank you very much. This was outstanding, and you turned me on to somebody else that I can read now. Glad I made it this morning. That was great. Thank you. Thank you.
So Uma, I was curious when I was talking about how Morris Friedman was a part of Gandhi's ashram and had designed his spinning wheel and had helped convince that one Raja to give his power to his people. And it was kind of a experiment in democracy, which apparently succeeded. Had you heard about any of that? You're muted, by the way. Let me unmute you. Okay, I can't hear you. Here you go.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, thank you so much. I enjoyed every word of it. And regarding your question, I recall Gandhiji meeting Raman Maharshi, but not Nisargadatta Maharaj. So I don't think they met, but I could be wrong. Gandhiji deeply respected Raman Maharshi's teachings, particularly I am philosophy.
Sure.
So that's all I know.
Okay, all right. I was just curious. I didn't know how well known any of this was. Yeah, so.
I have one observation. In the case of most of the spiritual seekers, one thing stands out, and that is, say for example, Ramakrishna. also Raj Chandra, who came very, very close to becoming Gandhiji's guru. Second instance, and there are many, in which they so much, what's the word, neglect their body. They do not, first of all, think that their body, their soul, and therefore they are not that careful about maintaining their health. And that's what happened as you described to Nisargadatta Maharaj also. He just did not care about it. And he only focused on who I am philosophy. And
Yes.
that I have observed in many other cases. So Rajchandra stands out among all of them, that he was so deeply into his own spiritual pursuit that actually he also died very, very young at age 32 because he contracted a disease which was then incurable.
Yeah.
So anyone to comment on that, spiritual people, they don't as much care about these things or body or pain. They are able to master the pain. But if they had been careful from our worldly point of view, they could have overcome the disease or lasted longer.
Thank you, Uma.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing I should say, when he talks about focusing on the self, the internal witness or the consciousness, the eternal consciousness that's within us as well as outside of us and all around us and of which we comprise. Mm-hmm. He didn't talk about this often, but he, for those people who somehow could just not quite access that sense of consciousness. He also mentioned that you could focus on the Shakti, the energy, the prana that runs through you, the life force, because it's tied to that consciousness. In fact, they are both ultimately the same. I actually have a quote about that. But anyhow, so it's, and I also, well, let me get his quote here. It says, he pointed out the obvious, that without the prana or Shakti vital energy, we cannot live, think, feel, move, or do anything. Whereas consciousness is the static sentience principle in our lives, the prana Shakti life force is the dynamic working kinetic principle. Although ultimately they are not really two, they are one. Consciousness and life force are two components inextricably woven together of one principle. So, there are different ways of accessing this consciousness. It's very close to the way any of us interact with the spiritual essence. We either view it as separate from ourselves, and so we do that, it is said, because we want to savor the sweetness of the relationship, or we can look at the sacred essence within us and worship it within us. It's very similar, but one is more within us. And we also view ourselves as, of course, obstructing our experience and perception of it by building up our small egos and getting attached to our own goals and desires and so forth. Any questions?
Hey, Ryan, this is Tom Carr. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Tom.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I've got a microphone that I think works. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So my experience with, I Am That. I got that book years ago. First, I just loved your talk. This is wonderful. It was really good. Thank you. Thank you for the talk.
Thank you.
I got I Am That years ago, and I remember I read a little bit every night, and it just had a major effect on me. And then I read a little bit every night. I came to the end, and then I just started over at the beginning, and that went on for several years. And it was a major influence on me. But at the time I was doing, and still I'm doing Vipassana meditation, which is very different than looking for the I am. And I tried to do what he was saying, but I never really could do it. Maybe it was because I was so involved with the other stuff. Or let me just say one other note before I go on. I read I Am That, and then I got some of those other books of translations of his stuff. None of them to me were really all that good. It may have been different translators or a different time in his life, but I would recommend to anybody that's interested in this, get I Am That, and probably don't spend a lot, or well, you can look at the other books, but my experience was that they weren't very good. And I Am That is a really good book.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was never really able to do the I Am meditation in a way that it worked for me. And I'm real curious about your experience with it. Like, what do you actually do as best you can describe it? It's hard to describe, but what are you doing, and how does it work, and how does it feel to you?
Okay. All right. Well, I will say that some of his devotees, and you probably read this in the book, said, we can only access this I Am That briefly. And his response was, even briefly is okay. You're going to build on that. And I will say that there is something to that. So the more I do it, the more frequently I can access that inside witness. I almost I do it different ways. I think when you meditate, you follow your intuition a lot of times. If you're not focused intently on one particular object or chakra or whatever. And one of the ways that I do it is to imagine myself turning around almost and facing the witness, facing the consciousness. Also, he also talks about not doing it just during meditation, but throughout the day, trying to maintain an awareness of the larger consciousness. So that's really difficult. That's the most difficult part for me, because you get lost in your own ego desires and goals and this and that. But it helps if you really try to stay in the moment, in the present moment, because it can sometimes, when you achieve that, truly achieve that, you're not projecting into the future or going in the past. You're right there and you feel the larger consciousness. You're not feeling yourself anymore. And an incredible sense of peace comes. And I think the farther you go along in any type of spiritual practice, eventually you're going to get a communication in some way with your higher self, your higher soul, or God, however you envision it, your soul itself. I also, and I'll give you an example, I've been reading a book by Paul Brunting. A Search Through Secret India is what he's famous for. He went to India to look for gurus, and he met Ramana Maharshi. And anyhow, he wrote a book about spiritual practice, how to do spiritual practice. And as he proceeded in this I am attentiveness, he began hearing his own higher self, I forget what he called it, but something like higher self, talk to him, actually talk to him. He would hear an audible voice. I see lights that will flash in acknowledgement of like correct thoughts, trains of thoughts. I think those are two ways. I know there are other ways. I'm sure people are varied. There are probably many ways to experience maybe a presence. You feel a presence. So the more you do something, I think you're led, you're guided. You just have to be open to translating things or accepting things as guidance that you might not normally be attentive to. I'm sorry, this was not a very good response. It was all over the place.
It's a wonderful response. Thank you. And maybe this presentation of yours is my guidance.
Okay.
We'll
Hi,
see.
Ryan. Hi, Ryan. This is Vivek Swarup. I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So I'm listening to you from here. Here. Enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. I have read I Am That long time back, and then seen Wayne Dyer also reflect on it. My question is, I'm trying to understand any correlation between witnessing and what is the phenomena, these days, not meditation, but, living in the present.
So a correlation between living in the present and, did you say meditating?
Not meditating, not meditation, there's a term that people are using these days, which is
Mindfulness.
Yes, mindfulness.
Okay.
Mindfulness. People are, talking about mindfulness and experiencing it. And, I always prefer witnessing that, I can witness things that are happening rather than, being self-absorbed and,
Yes.
there's a detachment.
Okay. So so I think that's tied with practicing equanimity or dispassion. So you're attempting you still have goals, you still have a plan for life and so forth. So you do what's necessary, but you don't get attached to the outcome. In the same way, when you're practicing mindfulness, you can be firmly in the present without having desires, of course, and it gives you the sense of peace. And I want to read you something. This is another question and answer thing. I didn't put it in the speech, but I think it pertains to this topic that we're talking about right now. Maharaj says you want to have a quiet mind, okay? From this, everything will happen. So quieting the thoughts, and during meditation, of course, you can do that after you get to a certain stage. Thoughts do drop off anyhow, or you can make an attempt to stop the thoughts yourselves. That normally does not last very long. It's hard to do, but it can be done. But here we go. When I look into myself, says the questioner, I find my strongest desire is to create a monument, to build something which will outlast me. Even when I think of a home, wife, and child, it's because of a lasting, solid testimony to myself. Maharaj says, right, build yourself a monument. How do you propose to do it? Questioner, it matters little what I build as long as it's permanent. Maharaj, surely you can see for yourself that nothing is permanent. All wears out, breaks down, dissolves. The very ground on which you build gives way. What can you build that will outlast all? What do you have that is lasting? Neither your body nor mind will last. You must look elsewhere. Questioner, I long for permanency, but I find it nowhere. Maharaj, are you yourself not permanent? Questioner, I was born, I shall die. Maharaj, can you truly say you were not before you were born? And can you possibly say when dead, now I am no more? You cannot say from your own experience that you are not. You can only say, I am. Others too cannot tell you you are not. Permanency is a mere idea, born of the action of time. Time, again, depends on memory. By permanency, you mean unfailing memory through endless time. You want to eternalize the mind, which is not possible. Questioner, then what's eternal? Maharaj, that which does not change with time. You cannot eternalize a transient thing. Only the changeless is eternal. Questioner, all I want is peace. Maharaj, you can have for the asking all the peace you want. Questioner, I am asking. Maharaj, you must ask with an undivided heart. Detach yourself from all that makes your mind restless. Renounce all that disturbs its peace. If you want peace, deserve it. Questioner, surely everyone deserves peace. Maharaj, only those who don't disturb it deserve it. Okay, so I think that kind of says it all, that we,
Yes.
equanimity, staying in the moment, and then also trying to be aware of the larger consciousness. If you can't envision something within you as a presence, then just the idea of consciousness all around you, I am not a person. Like for many of my meditations, I would imagine chopping off my body parts. So I chop off more and more body parts and see where the center of my being seemed to be. And I could chop off just about everything and still feel like I was there. So if you can do that, chop off your body as much as you can and chop off all your identifications. I am a mother, I am this or that. I think all those things work together. For it's very difficult. I mean, consciousness or focus is the thing that really gets you there. Earnest pursuit gets you probably to anything that you want in life. It's just that we are not earnest about it enough, whatever it is that we think we want, or else we would probably get it. And so those of us who do achieve a spiritual union in some way or a spiritual breakthrough do because we put everything else aside, or they put everything else aside until they get there. The rest of us, we want it, but we don't want it badly enough.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, this is Paul, and I just wanted to also thank you for your talk. I guess Nisargadatta was one of those people that I always wanted to learn more about. In fact, I believe I've had that book, I Am That, has been sitting on my shelf for about 20 years. And it's just, there's so many, the collected works of Swami Vivekananda is about 12, I don't know, I think it's 12 volumes or something. And it's just, last week we had a really wonderful talk on Howard Thurman at the Vedanta Center. And I just sometimes feel like the spiritual supermarket is there's just too many choices. There's too many, like the man who jumps on his horse and rides off in all directions at once. It's, I just wonder, in terms of setting priorities with the spiritual practice and how you've managed to navigate that with all, I know you're you've exposed yourself to many different traditions, and
I think it's a matter of trying them and going with what works for you at what time it works for you. I don't necessarily think that it has to be a static or pursuit, that it will change as you change and as you develop. So yeah, I've gone through a lot of things. The thing that a lot of approaches that worked for me at that time, I'll tell you, I devotion, personal experience or relationship with the divine is very important to me. But when I was experiencing all these lights and everything, I felt that maybe I was inducing it myself. That emotionalism I didn't know if it was authentic or genuine. So I decided to switch to a approach that was more methodical in working and destroying the ego to see if anything changed. It didn't. I experienced my own soul and I still have light. So I guess that wasn't the problem. But anyhow, I was initially attracted to Nisargadatta. I had read something about him where he talked about focusing on the self, and I must have run across the Shakti thing. But it had occurred to me that maybe this is what I should be doing before I read that. And so it rang a bell with me. And so that's why I am now involved in this path.
So is that your primary pathway through these of Nisargadatta?
Well, your voice went out for me. I'm going to guess what you were just asking if that's my primary path. You know, as I said, it's kind of a conglomeration. I try to do a lot of different things. The awareness, also the mindfulness. I meditate a lot.
Mhm.
I talk. When I'm meditating, I try different methods sometimes in order to, you know, that constant, I'm always teaching in my thoughts and I get so tired of my voice. Stop talking, stop teaching. So sometimes I'll just stop the thoughts. Sometimes I'll guide my talks. I'll be my own tour guide. And so my voice will say, and it will always keep, like Nisargadatta would only talk about spiritual topics. I'll make my voice only talk about spiritual topics and tell me what to do and what to think and where to go. So I have different approaches. As I said, I think it's kind of intuitive for me anyhow.
I'd like to talk about how I happen to put my spiritual path. With me? Okay. Since we're talking about that a little bit, about how you collecting stuff. In 1999, I spent a week in Costa Rica with a guy named Eckhart Tolle. And he, you know, this is where he got big. You know, this is a long time ago, right after the book was published, but before it got to be kind of, you know, viral, you might say. So we spent a week down there, just a few people, me and him and some other people. And at one point towards the end, I said, you know, Eckhart, you know, I know about the thing about when you're 29 years old, you had that experience in London, you're kind of sitting there and everything, boom. What did you do to make sense of that? And he said, well, I don't know, I didn't know what to do. I read a couple of books, but there was just another mind speaking. I said, no book helped you? He said, well, there was one. I said, what was that? I Am That by Nisargadatta. I've never heard of any of that. So I, of course, ordered that book immediately and started practicing according to that. And then after a while, I stopped following Eckhart around anyway, because that's really all I needed, I found out. And then I started thinking, what is special about this book? Because we were talking about that, like Gene Dunn's books and stuff. And I think, well, that sounds pretty good. These are more advanced, but I Am That speaks to me. And I think the answer is Maurice Friedman, who, as you said, I think was the president, Nisargadatta was president at his death in 1976. But going back to the David Godman thing, at one point, David asked Nisargadatta something like, not has anybody ever been enlightened? Did anybody ever really understand your teachings? This is towards the end of Nisargadatta's life. And Nisargadatta kind of paused, said one, and that was Maurice Friedman. So I think that has something to do with why, as a couple of people pointed out, I Am That kind of is the gold standard.
Right.
You know, Nisargadatta and everything else you kind of look at, well, that sounds interesting. I sort of understand that, but it doesn't have that power and eloquence and beauty that I Am That is. And I think that goes back to Maurice Friedman.
Good point.
So it's
Yeah.
my theory on why I Am That is so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. Maurice Friedman was the one who compiled that, and so he could infuse it with his own understanding of the Nisargadatta. There's an actual and interesting, when the Nisargadatta was sitting at Maurice Friedman's, as he was dying, Maurice Friedman, an old woman came into the room and said she had been sent by a man to take care of Maurice during his final days. Maurice sent her back out again, but on the way said he didn't want anyone. But as she was leaving, she saw Ramana Maharshi's photo and said, he's the man who sent me. And so, of course, he said, well, come on back.
By the way, one more thing. I think you're talking about Paul Rutten. The term is the overself, which probably
right, yes. Yeah, the overself.
I want to mention one other thing about what you had mentioned a minute ago about Ramana Maharshi talking about a quiet mind. When I was reading I Am That the first time a while back, many years ago, the thing that stuck in my mind was, one of them was everything yields to earnestness. You know, rather than all these questions and everything, just, you could be on the wrong path or the wrong teacher, but if you're earnest, everything everything yields to earnestness. And the how-to, he said, and I am that, you know, if you can stay in the sense of awareness, to some extent, some current of it, like you were saying, you try to do in your own life, you try to stay as much as you can, given, you know, what's going on, then that's good. But really what matters is how many times per day you come back to it. You lose it, you come back to it and so forth, which is a measure of earnestness and so on. The guy who helped me understand the how-to, like one I was talking about, is a guy named Michael Langford. He wrote a book entitled The Most Direct Means to Eternal Bliss. And he talks about exactly what to do and what not to do. That is very compatible with Nisargadatta as well as Ramana Maharshi. So anybody who wants to look at that, Google it or go online. The most direct means to eternal bliss. Very simple, very easy.
Who's it by again?
The Most Direct Means to Eternal Bliss by Michael Langford. So that's, anyway, I want to pass that along.
How do you spell that, Steve? How do you spell his last name?
It's, the last name is spelled as it sort of sounds, Langford, Michael Langford.
Langford, thank you.
Anyway, so that's all I had to say. By the way, one more thing, do you know anybody, since you're kind of into this, I mean, I really enjoy these kinds of involvements with my guru, which Brother Shankar told me one time a few years ago, he's your guru. Okay, which I always appreciated that. Anybody, any of the groups like Zoom groups or local Atlanta groups who really zero in on their Nisargadatta and some of the stuff that we're talking about today and more like how do you do it and how do you decide on him? Because I would love to have that type of interaction. So I was going to ask you if you were aware of any.
I've looked around and I have not found that. That's not to say that there isn't anything. I just didn't find it in my search.
Okay. Well,
maybe somebody else.
Question. All right. Well, thank you. That's all I had to say.
Time to start one, Steve.
What's that?
Time to start one.
You're the start one.
Time to start one. It's
oh, okay. I got you. Well, we'll see about that.
There isn't a group. You and Ryan are the nucleus of one. So I'll bet you'll find a lot of people who'd like to join in with you if you put together a Facebook page and a website. And
I appreciate the encouragement. That's great.
And started doing some Zoom meetings.
My thing is more about what to do and what not to do. You know, he says in the book, you know, just go through the necessary motions, like in the Army. You know, you go into boot camp, but then you pop out a different. So what are those? That's what I really am obsessed with. What do you do and not do to move along the path towards? Because he says, you know, the point that the disciple accepts the words of the guru as true and lives by them in every detail of his daily life is the threshold of realization. Not that that's why you should do it, but what does that look like, you know? And like she said, all these different concepts and reincarnation, do these things, monkey see, monkey do. That's really what I love about him.
Yes.
And that would be kind of my approach if I ever tried to.
You and Ryan clearly are embodying this. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate it. Maybe we can talk offline and see what comes out.
This is Keith. If you do, please let me know. I'd love to join.
If they do, they can let us know, and we'll put a notice in our newsletter.
And this is Tom Carr, and I'd also like to join that group.
Okay.
So now you are 4. It's just who's going to take responsibility. That's always the issue. Who's going to be the motive power? You know, that's always how it begins. Who will do the work? Is there anything else from anyone for Ryan? All right, then this has been absolutely beyond what I could have imagined. Ryan, what a beautifully organized and presented dissertation on Nisargadatta and his teachings. very enlightening and ennobling. Thank you. Thank you for being who you are. And just publicly, thank you for your service to the center. As I mentioned earlier, Ryan is retiring from the board, or has retired from the board after serving for many years as a trustee and for several years as our secretary of the board. So with that, I will close with our closing prayer. And unless there's anything else from anyone before? Okay. Let there be peace in outer space.
Let there be peace in outer space.
Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters.
Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters.
Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees.
Let there
be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees.
May the gods be peaceful.
May the gods be peaceful.
May the whole universe be pervaded by peace.
May the whole universe be pervaded by peace.
Let this infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being.
Let this infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all joyous and suffering beings everywhere. So once again, thank you all for being with us. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai, Durga, Durga, Durga. Go in Mother's loving and protective embrace. Be safe during this dreadful time, and be as cheerful as your heart will permit. See you Tuesday evening for those of you who wish to join us for the class on Holy Mother. We're reading the book on her life. So with that, I'll end the meeting. And once again, Ryan, thank you for everything, including this really remarkable and splendid presentation.
Wow, it was my pleasure.
Yes. Well, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. I know the feeling.
Yeah.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.